Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Ryan. I'm a former Royal Marine from the United Kingdom. And today we're going to react to a video called The United States versus the World. Who would win? We're going to get into this one, troops. From my military experience, I'm going to try and give you the best breakdown of this video. And yeah, I don't know if I've reacted to this before, but I've got a memory like a fish, guys. Either way, I'm going to do it again, and you can cross-reference it to see if I've said anything different. But let's just get straight into it, guys. Before we do, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It really does help me out with the algorithm, all of that good stuff. If you're brand new to the channel, thank you for joining us, guys. And yeah, thanks again. Let's get straight into this one, guys.
A superpower is defined as a state with the ability to exert influence or project power on a global scale.
The end of the video.
And if needed, in more than one region of the globe at a time. The United States, currently the world's sole superpower, fits this description with an...
Is it the world's sole superpower? I'll let you guys get into the comments for that one. I think that's up for debate.
Official military doctrine that states its military forces must be ready and capable to fight two major theater wars simultaneously, a capability no other nation on Earth can even approach. But what would happen if the United States found itself in a war against the entire rest of the world? How would that war potentially play out? The rules of this war game will be as follows.
Right, well, it depends on if, like, your warheads and stuff were going to be used. If that was the case, then they'd be in trouble as well, you know, because they heavily rely on NATO to be able to extend their global influence. But goes without saying, if they're fighting conventional warfare, yeah, they could fight on multiple fronts across the globe and actually sustain themselves for a long period of time. And where they're geographically located in the world, you know, they're surrounded by a lot of ocean, guys. You'd have to get through their naval fleet and their defense systems on the coastline first. It's going to be really, really hard, that's for sure.
No nuclear weapons allowed, and war will be simulated.
Right, he's just answered my question on that one.
To have broken out after weeks of preamble, as in a surprise attack, the United States with its forces spread around the world would likely lose its non-homeland forces entirely, but not before delivering crippling blows to most of the world's major powers and knocking them out of the conflict early. The US's main opposition would be in the form of a European coalition to include Russia and a China-India alliance. The rest...
China-India alliance, I don't see that happening ever, guys. All right, certainly not in the next 50 years or so. You know, China and India are at loggerheads with each other. The only thing that would keep them stable in this war is Russia. I think they would be the intermediate, so to speak, to keep them happy with each other. But I don't see them ever becoming, you know, alliances anytime soon. That's for sure.
The rest of the world's contribution would be mostly in material supplies or financial backing, as while even nations like Japan boast a formidable military capability, they mostly lack the ability to actually deploy that power outside of their own borders. In fact, that would be the biggest hurdle to any global offensive against the United States. With historical military preparations focused on conflicts such as NATO versus Russia or China versus India, most militaries around the world lack the ability to transport military hardware across the oceans.
It's that forward projection which America does really, really well. I would like to say that Great Britain used to have that capability. We don't have that capability nowhere near as good as America. In fact, we need to work alongside America to be able to have that forward projection capability, especially to sustain it for a long period of time. We do have the Royal Marines who can act independently as 3 commando brigade, but to sustain themselves for any length of time would be really, really hard. In fact, the United States has just came out and said that Great Britain is no longer a significant fighting force on a global stage, which to a degree, how low we've become in terms of our funding and our budget with regards to military, I kind of agree with that, guys, and it's a sad state of affairs.
In a meaningful quantity, making a decisive assault against the US homeland impossible. Meanwhile, due to its commitments to fighting wars well outside its own borders for the last 80 years, the United States operates the world's largest air and naval transport fleets that number in the hundreds of ships and aircraft, more than most modern nations combined.
Logistics is key.
This lack of mobility will prove to be a major weakness for the global alliance and severely hinder their ability to respond to US actions. Today, the United States operates its forces in every geographic area of the world and has split its command structure into 9 combatant commands, 6 responsible for global geographic areas of responsibility.
It really is, when you look at that picture, world police, okay? And some people might, you know, not agree with that in terms of them being situated in such a powerful position, globally speaking, but who else would you rather be in charge? Now, you know, my money is back in America. They've got their pros and their cons, but I would rather have them in charge than... I don't want to say any countries. I'll let you guys decide which one would be a second best alternative. There's loads of second best alternatives, actually.
In the weeks leading up to the outbreak of war, the United States would likely pull its forces out of Europe and non-American bases in the Pacific, disbanding its European, African, and Southern commands. Pacific Command, Northern Command, and Central Command would absorb these forces. Battlefield 1, Middle East. U.S. Central Command would receive an influx of former European assets, with the U.S. bolstering its forces in the Middle East and bases in Afghanistan and Iraq with one goal: destroying the major oil refineries and distribution centers while denying access to the sea lanes that transport oil from the region.
Putting off the ability to resupply the troops on the grounds. The troops on the grounds don't run without oil, guys. So that's a big move, and it's a good move.
81% of the world's oil reserves are located in OPEC countries, and over 60% of the world's oil passes through the Arabian Sea alone. The US's strategic goals would be simple: shut off the global oil tap. With the world's 12th largest oil reserves, the United States could easily supply itself while denying the rest of the world access to vital Middle East oil.
How long would they be able to do that for, troops? This is the big thing. It's all right being able to have that capability, but it's longevity that we're talking about. How long would America be able to sustain itself against the world? I don't know the answer to that.
Europe, which would represent the United States' most formidable adversary, relies on Middle East oil for 40 to 50% of its total annual use, meaning an American stranglehold on the region would cripple any European war effort as reserves run out and their economies begin to collapse.
Right, that's really interesting, guys, then. So they'd have to target the Middle East first, then, if they wanted to, stop that oil reserve capability to be able to resupply their troops on the ground. But that would be a massive war in the Middle East, guys. That would be huge. And America would have to have forward projection forces capable of sustaining themselves within that region. Bearing in mind, all of the other countries would be against them as well. That wouldn't be easy, guys. It would be possible, but it wouldn't be easy.
China would face a similar problem, as 50% of its total oil imports all come from the Middle East, making the region the first front in our war. At the outbreak of war, the United States would first strike at oil production and distribution facilities across the Middle East via carrier-based strike aircraft backed up by former European theater aircraft, now based off American bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. With the world's largest air tanker fleet and flanking the all-important Persian Gulf from both Iraq and Afghanistan, American aircraft could penetrate deep into Middle East territory with impunity, striking at targets from the Straits of Hormuz all the way to the Suez Canal itself.
The thing is, though, it depends on, I can't remember when this video was made, and it doesn't, we got to look at Afghanistan now, okay? That is not the same place as it was a couple of years ago. America left a lot of infrastructure there. I don't know if that hardware is going to be able to, in terms of, the airstrips and stuff, is America going to be able to utilize that going forward? Bearing in mind, Afghanistan has gained access and appropriated all of that kit and equipment and hardware when they evacuated the country effectively. This is the thing that we need to think about in the future. Is access to Afghanistan viable now? I'm going to say probably not, or at least it isn't as accessible as it was 3-4 years ago.
Though regional forces would be able to offer some initial resistance, most operate outdated Soviet-era or non-modern American-built aircraft, with the exception of current U.S. allies such as Saudi Arabia, who would be able to field modern variant F-15s, Typhoon Eurofighters, and Italian-British Tornado multi-role strike aircraft in small numbers. Without European support, however, the air war would go very poorly for Middle East powers for several reasons. Firstly, lacking a joint unified command, each nation would be unable to coordinate its air assets with its neighbors, resulting in confusion and low sortie rates. Most Middle East powers also field very few electronic warfare or early warning and control aircraft. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Israel would represent the most formidable threats to American air power, yet neither nation fields dedicated electronic attack aircraft, while the US is equipped with over 200, mostly F-35 variants and EA-18G Growlers.
So, in a nutshell, guys, just to explain this a little bit differently, it's okay having the numbers, it's okay having the infrastructure, but if you're technologically not as advanced as the enemy or the aggressor, then all of those assets can be basically taken out of the war front. Okay, so in this case, America has the more superior technology. Putting those airframes into the sky, it's just going to be cataclysmic for them. Okay, they're going to get put out of action quicker than you can say go. That's one thing for sure.
Without adequate numbers of AWACS and electronic warfare assets, Middle East powers would be unable to coordinate the large amounts of sorties needed to counter US air power, and they'd find their aircraft and ground-based air defenses actively jammed or spoofed by American EW assets. In the opening days of the Middle East War, the US would likely see moderate casualties among its air forces, as it would be mostly operating against obsolete aircraft and disorganized or inexperienced air forces. The greatest threat to US craft would come from ground-based air defenses, which range in obsoletism yet remain a formidable obstacle to US air power.
We've seen the same thing in the Ukraine at the moment in time with Russia. They've got a lot of hardware, but a lot of it's obsolete due to the age and the lack of maintenance that's been going on with some of the kit. So it's rendered useless. Again, guys, highlighting the point. It doesn't matter what kit you've got. If you don't look after it properly and you don't update it accordingly to go in line with modern warfare, it's rendered useless. It might as well not exist in the first place.
With a concentration of American power in the region, it's a foregone conclusion that Middle East powers would have begun to move their air defenses to protect vital oil shipping routes and manufacturing/distribution centers. Yet Desert Storm proved how effective the United States can be at dismantling a nation's air defense network, and most nations in the region have invested little into modernizing their defense infrastructures in the years since.
So true, guys. So true. It's important.
The US would suffer most of its losses to its fourth-generation aircraft, such as its F-15, F-16, and F-18s, while its fifth-generation F-35s and F-22s would prove much more difficult to contend with. With an inventory of 385 active F-35s, over 1,800 more on order, and 197 F-22s, the US retains the only operational fifth-generation air fleets, with current allies fielding a token force of F-35s purchased from America, and the Russians and Chinese still not fielding combat-ready fifth-generation aircraft.
So China and Russia would not be able to contend with that then, guys. They just wouldn't be able to, they wouldn't be able to be combat ready. It's one thing, but to, fight such a different level of advanced technology, you're not going to be able to do that.
Despite its technological and operational superiority, however, sheer numbers would present a threat to American forces. So instead of seizing key oil production or distribution facilities, the US would instead focus its efforts on keeping those facilities and trade route choke points shut down while defending against attacks on its air bases. A single sunk
That would be so hard, guys. That would be really, really tough to defend those against aggressors. I mean, you think about it, oil facilities are just one bomb away from being destroyed and destroying everything in its way as well. It's like, yeah, that's going to be extremely hard.
A supertanker could block the Suez Canal for weeks, shutting down one of the most important oil trade routes in the world, while constant harassment by American air power would make the Straits of Hormuz impassable. With few major naval threats in the Pacific, American Pacific naval forces would be split between containing China and bolstering U.S. Central Command forces in establishing a blockade of trade routes across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. With 20 carriers, 11 of which are super carriers, more than the rest of the world combined, a blockade of the Indian and Pacific Oceans would be easily achieved. With a staggering 80% of global oil trade passing through the Indian and Pacific Oceans, the rest of the world would be forced to abandon any plans to attack the U.S. homeland and first try to dislodge the Americans from the Middle East. Yet
attacking the US homeland is a different story completely. It's all right, America being here, there, and everywhere, but for fleets of military personnel, whether it's via land, sea, or air, trying to actively get into these countries, into America, that would be a suicide mission, and it would be a terrible utilization of your assets, okay? There's better ways to use your assets. Attacking America and, on the continent would be extremely detrimental to your military capability. You're going to be losing a lot of infrastructure in a very quick period of time, not allowing you to defend effectively. That would be the worst thing to do, guys. I don't know what you think. Let me know in the comments.
Yet they would be doing so while operating on a ticking clock as domestic oil reserves begin running dry. In a prolonged conflict, immediate development of oil reserves in Russia would begin, though with only 80 billion barrels of proven reserves,
only.
Versus over 800 billion in the Middle East, it would be imperative for the global coalition to dislodge the US from the region or face eventual oil starvation and defeat. Europe would be faced with the difficult decision of committing the majority of its air and naval power to a Middle East campaign, yet with an American Navy larger than the next 8 navies in the world combined, they would be doing so at the risk of leaving their coasts vulnerable to harassment from American attack submarines and carrier strike groups. American attack submarines in particular would prove to be an overwhelming force, with 55 nuclear attack subs alone.
Well, Sweden might have something to say with that. And do a bit of research, guys. You'll know exactly what I mean with that comment.
Europe, to include Russia, fields nearly 100 submarines, yet only about a third of those are nuclear powered and range from 10 to 25 years behind US subs in tech. Lacking in major transport capabilities and the ability to adequately protect either their sea lanes or any attempts to move troops by sea, the global coalition would be extremely hard-pressed to dislodge the US from the Middle East. While an eventual overwhelming of US ground forces would be possible, it would take weeks of buildup and slow moving of forces via ground routes to avoid American submarines.
So what I'm gathering from this, guys, halfway through is that the Middle East is an integral part of this war, and that's where it's literally going to be won or lost, guys. Okay, so a lot of emphasis to start is going to be in the Middle East, as always. You know, I think that's got a lot to do with the production of oil and stuff. It's the obvious one, really. You take out that, and you control the oil trade. You control the trade for the rest of the globe. So effectively, this war will be started with gunfights. It will be played out with trade, war trading of oil. Whoever controls that will be able to suffocate the other countries from and hinder their movements. So it's really about energy, this war, you know.
Victory in the Middle East would be possible for the global coalition, but would only come at great expense of dwindling oil reserves, and any attempts to reopen the Middle East trade routes would certainly fail, as the US would concentrate its nuclear attack subs and carrier battle groups in the region. The coalition would be forced to rely on existing land-based pipelines, though these would not be enough to sustain the world economy, and the United States would certainly commit its stealthy B-2 bombers to the destruction of these pipelines and any attempts at building new ones. In short, a land victory would be probable for the global coalition, but without the ability to challenge the US Navy, global trade routes would be permanently shut down, effectively crippling the economies of coalition nations and the war effort.
So effectively what he's saying is it doesn't matter even if you win, you're going to be hindered with what you can do from that point, because you're not going to be able to sustain life as you know it without oil. So I think that's a battle that America's not even going to try. They're not even going to try and win a land battle on there. They're going to suffocate the trade routes and the oil reserves. They're going to control it via the Middle East. And effectively, people would not want to be at war with America as a result of that. So they win by default.
Battlefield 2, West Pacific. The West Pacific and South China Sea is the most economically important waterway in the world, with a full 1/3 of all global trade passing through the area, or about $5.3 trillion. China, South Korea, and Japan would especially have a vested interest in keeping these sea lanes open, yet none of those nations field a true blue water or deep ocean navy. In a global war, the United States would invest the majority of its expeditionary firepower in the West Pacific,
I was just about to say this is where the main naval front would be situated. Okay, there's a lot going on over there to control the seas, you know, the East China Sea and all of that. That's really where the Navy's going to be situated, and they can have the most impact on this war.
Having little to fear from an Atlantic incursion by European powers due to their lack of major military transport capability and navies designed for decades to engage Russian ships in literal combat rather than blue water operations. Japan would pose a significant challenge for US forces due to its very modern and robust self-defense forces, yet the island nation could be largely ignored due to Japan's lack of air tankers, limiting the range of its strike aircraft and 70-year self-defense military doctrine, which saw the nation only recently begin to build an expeditionary capability. With 155 F-15s making up the bulk of Japan's air force and only a combat range of 790 miles, it is doubtful the island nation would risk its 5 operational airborne refueling tankers to attempt offensive operations against the US Navy and its over 1,000 fighter aircraft, instead holding its air forces in reserve in case of an American attack on the homeland.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think they're going to utilize their kit and equipment to be able to effectively get them destroyed for no reason. Okay, that doesn't make any sense.
The US's first goal in the region would be to cut off all trade routes passing through the South China Sea. China would represent the US's biggest global adversary, yet like every other global power, to include Russia, it too lacks the navy and the transport capability to actually threaten the US homeland. In order to deny the nation the opportunity to build this capability, the US would immediately move to cut off Chinese trade through the South China Sea, something China would be particularly vulnerable to, as over 60% of its trade is delivered by sea.
Hey troops, if you're still here, please consider smashing that subscribe button. It really does help me out, guys. Let's get back to the video.
Though China lacks a navy formidable enough to threaten US Pacific forces, it more than makes up for this shortcoming with its ballistic missile forces. Its DF-26 ballistic missiles each have a range of 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers and would threaten any US base or ship as far out as Guam.
Yeah, and that's really significant, guys, because the United States effectively control that. So that would be really dangerous for them. You can see why Guam is such a logistical hub for America, as well as Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. These little islands might be small in stature, but pose a very prominent real-time positive effect for the military to be able to launch strategically from that location, guys. Guam's very, very important in this regard, although it is small.
At the outbreak of war, China would immediately launch a withering missile strike against American facilities on Guam. While Guam would be defended by THAAD, or Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Anti-Missile Systems, Aegis-equipped destroyers, and Patriot missile batteries, China would rely on heavy saturation strikes and overwhelm American missile defense systems, decimating the majority of American ground targets on the small island and rendering it inoperative as a military forward staging area.
Would they have the ability to do that, though? Or would America, their defense systems be, significant enough to be able to stop that onslaught? I'd like to think now in 2023, they do have the capability of withstanding that. I wouldn't expect America to be on Guam without having that capability. That's for sure.
For weeks. This would force America to rely on its naval assets in the region, which would be the secondary targets of China's opening barrage. Though long touted as carrier killers, China's DF-26 and DF-21 ballistic missiles each rely on a very long and complex kill chain, or chain of military assets required to recon a target, track it, and guide a missile to it. In order to accomplish this, China operates 30 Yaogan tracking and reconnaissance satellites grouped into constellations that, working together, would provide China 16 opportunities per 24-hour period to accurately target a U.S. Navy vessel to within 10 kilometers anywhere in the Pacific. The U.S. would certainly seek to counter this capability with deployment of its anti-satellite weapon systems, of which it remains extremely secretive about.
Yeah, I can't imagine there'd be too much information on that, guys. That's for sure. America's not gonna let that one out.
It is impossible to infer just how effective U.S. anti-sat weapons truly are due to a lack of information, but it is known that in the early 2000s, the U.S. Air Force successfully tested a deployment of mini-sats designed to kill or hijack enemy satellites, and in 2008, the U.S. successfully targeted and destroyed a defunct satellite with an SM-3 missile launched from the USS Lake Erie in the Pacific. With every U.S. destroyer and cruiser able to carry the SM-3, this could potentially pose a serious threat to Chinese space assets and degrade the capabilities of their ballistic missile forces.
American military is so powerful, guys. It goes beyond our, knowledge. I've worked with the US military, and they are phenomenal. But just to understand just how phenomenal, you've got to really dig deep into the information out there. It truly is impressive, guys, honestly.
In a push into the Pacific, however, the US would still suffer heavy casualties among its fleet due to Chinese long-range missile strikes. It's probable then that while it works to destroy Chinese space assets from afar, America would instead send its nuclear attack submarine fleet to blockade Chinese waters. China operates about 60 submarines, yet for years, those subs did not go on patrols or even leave port, as they were often sidelined by maintenance issues.
It's not enough, guys. That's not enough. 60 submarines for China is not enough to put America in any kind of trouble whatsoever. The fact that they haven't been serviced as well, it tells a massive story, that's for sure. I don't think they'd be able to contend with the United States might for the Navy anyway.
Only as recently as 2011 did Chinese subs actually begin to leave port, giving US subs the opportunity to tail them and discover that Chinese submarines were surprisingly easy to find and track due to their noisy nature.
So they're not going to be able to contend, guys, with the US military.
Defense experts estimated that Chinese sub technology was 10 years behind Russia.
Wow. That's really bad.
And about 20 years behind the US.
So 20 years behind the US public domain, I can guarantee that probably is about 50, 60 years behind some of the technology that is actually out there, guys. Anyone in the chat want to verify that with a comment? You let me know, guys.
The US, meanwhile, operates 55 nuclear attack submarines, with most of these being of the modern Virginia class. Armed with torpedoes and a complement of Tomahawk cruise missiles, Virginia attack subs could easily threaten Chinese surface and subsurface vessels and join its Ohio Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines in cruise missile attacks against Chinese inland industrial and military installations.
So just for reference, guys, I might be wrong on this. If someone could confirm whether I'm right or wrong in the chat. Just to put that into perspective, the US has got nearly 60 of those Virginia-class subs. I believe Britain has got like 1 or 2 of those. Check it out. But if that is true, that's phenomenally different. And these submarines are fantastic at what they do, okay? Really, really are top notch.
While in recent years, China has invested heavily into improving its anti-submarine warfare capabilities, it is still critically behind even regional powers such as South Korea and Japan, meaning that in the end, there is likely little China could do to stop US attack subs.
It's not
Though
happening.
it could likely keep American carrier battle groups out of the South China Sea for the first week or 2 of the war, China would be helpless to prevent a naval blockade by US attack subs. India, also reliant on South Pacific trade routes, would certainly dispatch its naval forces to attempt to break a US blockade, but would face the same issues in challenging US subs that China would. Having only 15 active submarines and also lacking in modern anti-submarine warfare capabilities, the Indian Navy would quickly find itself overpowered by American attack subs. Employing a combination of its submarine and anti-satellite assets, the US would likely break through the Chinese ballistic missile shield within 30 days and enact a complete blockade of the South Pacific, strangling regional powers economically.
Just think about this for a second, though, troops. Imagine if this was actually happening, if this was a reality for us all. I mean, that's not a reality I would like to live through, trust me. That's beyond World War III, okay? What even is that? America versus the world. It's a scary proposition, guys. A one that I would just not like to be, you know, if it put me on Mars or something, but I wouldn't want to be part of, you know, if you look at where I live, you know, in the United Kingdom, we're right in the thick of it, okay? I don't want to be a part of that story at all.
With a blockade of Middle East oil exports, the global war would then become a war of attrition, with the US
War of attrition. Why is that phrase fantastic?
carving out the world's major powers while able to sustain itself off its own domestic oil reserves. Having little to fear from a European transatlantic offensive due to Europe's lack of major military transport capabilities, American forces would be free to initiate ground offensives against Canada and Venezuela in order to seize its oil reserves as well.
Actually, I forgot about the likes of Canada. They'll be fighting against them as well. Yeah, this would be really difficult. Have you noticed how he hasn't spoke about Canada invading the homeland as well? That would pose a massive threat from that northern flank. It would be obviously a route for Russia to get in as well. Yeah, I would like to have seen this video speak more about that, because it would have had a very different effect. Let me know, guys, do you think that there would have been a chance for other countries to be able to invade the homeland should Canada be involved? That's a very different story indeed, troops.
Ultimately, the US Navy, the largest and best equipped in the world, would be the deciding factor in a global war. With such overwhelming firepower superiority, the United States would be able to fight defensively and without launching any major ground offensives outside of North America. Fielding a larger fleet than the next 8 navies combined, the US Navy, backed by the US Coast Guard, could easily defend the Atlantic sea lanes from any European incursion, while enacting blockades of major oil shipping routes through the Persian Gulf and Indian and Pacific Oceans. While the world would eventually be able to muster a large enough force to threaten the US, current military capabilities across the globe would be insufficient to prevent these naval blockades and would require years of buildup and expansion of navies from every modern nation. With the majority of global oil trade shut off by naval blockade, however, European and Asian economies would quickly shrink or outright collapse, making such a buildup improbable and ensuring an eventual US victory. Yet that victory would come at a titanic cost to even the US's own economy, and in the end, the entire global economy would likely shrink to levels not seen since the end of the Second World War.
Troops, fantastic video by Infographics. I'm really grateful for them for putting this type of content out. That was from September the 2nd, 2018. So I'll probably have reacted to that. Again, you'll be astonished with how bad my memory is. Let me know in the comments if you like that video. Please, before you go, drop a subscribe, like, and share the content far and wide, guys, okay? Want these videos to start blowing up. But the original video link will be in the description, and I'll see you in the next video, troops. Take it easy wherever you are, and thank you.